My work is focused on the Hermetic arts of astrology, alchemy, and theurgy. And I'm really honored to be here with you today and talk about alchemy. I could talk about this forever. It's something I'm really passionate about. And also, just as a warning, my voice is a little bit weak right now because of the pollen in the air. So I'm sorry if I'm clearing my throat a lot. But yeah, so before we dive into alchemy specifically, I kind of wanted to just briefly touch on what Hermeticism is, which is the overarching philosophy that includes alchemy, astrology, and theurgy. So, Hermeticism is a lineage of thought and a philosophy which has an emphasis on self-awareness. The ancients knew that by knowing oneself, the secrets of the universe would be reflected in that knowing and become revealed. If we think about the three branches of Hermeticism, we can see how all three of these individual branches are tools for humanity to understand where we come from, where we currently are in an ever-changing world, and also it provides us with pathways to reach our highest potential expression moving forward. So Hermeticism derives from the Egyptian god Thoth, the Greek god Hermes, and the Roman god Mercury, all ruling over the mind, all forms of communication, including symbolism and esoteric knowledge, and much more. Thank you. Appreciate that. Eventually, these three gods, Hermes, Mercury, and Thoth, merged during the Hellenistic era to create Hermes Trismegistus, or thrice great Hermes, who is said to have written the Corpus Hermeticum, the foundation of Hermetic wisdom teachings, which includes the Emerald Tablet, which alchemy really is stemmed from. This makes Hermes a sort of patron saint of these three branches of alchemy, astrology, and magic. And being the messenger between worlds and embodying a reconciliation of opposites motif, he is very important to all three branches of Hermeticism. Because all three branches really do follow that same premise of reconciling the opposites in order to come into a greater fulfillment and potential of who we really are. Hermeticism is really special in that it's not a religion or a belief system. It's actually a living tradition. And so we can literally see its principles in everything that we experience in our daily lives. And it's in everything that we observe and interact with through the law of correspondence. It's the stars above us and how they influence us through astrology. It is the birth, death, and rebirth cycle that we understand through alchemy. And it's in the numinous quality that we get to appreciate every day through the lens of theurgy that just animates things with synchronicity and connection. The most notable Hermetic principle, as above, so below, from the Emerald Tablet is not something so much to believe in as something to recognize as a universal truth. The circumstances that we're currently facing as a collective are the same circumstances that have preceded every Hermetic renaissance throughout history, and there have been many. Every fall of any great civilization or empire has taken place because there is not a foundational cosmology associated with it. That rings true, or that exists at all. Every culture needs to be anchored by a cosmology that holds significant meaning both on a personal level and on a collective level. And Hermeticism provides that cosmology because by its very nature, it'll always be relevant and it can never truly disappear or be destroyed because it is literally reflected in the stars above, the earth below, in our psyches and in our bodies, our somas. It just kind of lives all on its own. So we're currently seeing a Hermetic Renaissance beginning already with the rise of astrology making its way into the mainstream culture, with magic also making its way into the mainstream culture, although it often looks kind of more like an aesthetic than a discipline. And we're also seeing it with the rise of alchemy. But, alchemy is like a big buzzword right now, and it is translating to transformation, which is correct. But alchemy is so much more than that. There's like an entire theory behind it and body of knowledge behind it that you can really only understand if you go through it intentionally. So that's what we're going to be touching on today. And I think the reason why alchemy isn't as readily accessible to people is because the language is antiquated. Nobody really understands what the calcination phase is unless you're in it. And that's something that I'd really love to be able to modernize and bring into the greater culture as something that's, just talked about regularly, because it would create so many more pathways of connection between people if we could understand where we all are in our own transformational process. So before we dive into the alchemical process itself and what it's all about, I wanted to touch on what inner alchemy is and how it came to be. So a lot of us, when we think of alchemy, we might think of the Elizabethan era geniuses like Edward Kelly and John Dee working in their laboratories and trying to turn lead into gold, which they did. It might have been in trace amounts, but they did succeed in doing that. But what they realized through their experiments was that the physical transmutation that they were achieving was actually happening on a internal spiritual level to them. So they recognized that alchemy was so much more than a physical transmutation. It was actually more of a spiritual initiation. And they recognize this in themselves through synchronicities. So they would be doing like 1 or 2 steps of the alchemical process and find that same theme or motif happening in their personal lives. And so they recognized it as something that could change the world, essentially, and change humanity. And I believe that that's why they pursued it so heavily, especially Edward Kelly. John Dee was kind of more dabbling in it, but Edward Kelly really kind of devoted his life to it. Paracelsus describes alchemy as a means to carry to its end something that has not yet been completed. So it doesn't matter whether we're talking about a metal, a plant, a human soul, or a culture, or a planet at large. Anything that has a spirit can go through the alchemical process and reach its highest embodied expression. And it's important to note that when you do tap into that embodied expression of the refined spirit, also known as the Philosopher's Stone, it's not a one and done process. It's something that builds on itself. So every time that we touch the Philosopher's Stone, every time we complete the process, it becomes more and more solid within us and more accessible and more enduring until we find ourselves unfazed by old challenges that once plagued us and free of the confines of fear and solid in our understanding of ourselves and our purpose here and what needs to be done to fulfill that purpose. It doesn't really mean that we're physically going to live forever, which a lot of people think the Philosopher's Stone means that. But it does mean that when we aren't operating from our highest expression, there's something within us that lets us know that we'll be back there in no time. And we find whatever darkness or blockages that arise between us and our greatest desires, they're able to be transmuted more swiftly and gracefully and more completely than they were able to be transmuted in the past. So there are 3 phases of alchemy. And first, I wanted to just say, some of you might have heard of the 12 steps of alchemy as opposed to the 7 steps of alchemy. I just wanted to go over what, the distinction between the two. The 7 steps of alchemy are based off of the 7 planets and the 7 chakras, as well as the 7 metals. And I found it to be much more aligned with being able to recognize the symbols of alchemy when you're going through the internal alchemy process, as opposed to the 12 steps of alchemy, which is based off of the 12 signs of the zodiac and is much newer. The 7 steps date back like really, really far. And that makes sense if they're based off of the planets. The planets are a more like pure archetypal expression of the same gateways that we have within ourselves, and we'll talk about that more than the 12 signs of the zodiac. So I practice the 7 steps of alchemy, and that's what we'll be moving through in this class. So there are 3 phases. The first is called the Negredo, or the black phase. Also called the... And in this phase, we are presented with the most challenging part of the process, because it's all about the breaking down, or the great dissolve. We've been through these moments, and they often look like a dark night of the soul, or a tower moment, if you're into the tarot. Essentially, we feel disconnected from ourselves. We don't really understand what's going on in our lives, but it seems like everything's kind of falling apart around us. And that's just a part of life, right? In the white phase, or albedo, also called the whitening, we begin to see a glimmer of what lies on the other side of that darkness of Negredo. And it's this glimmer that ignites our willpower and our complete love of self, to the point that we're able to move through the challenges with greater grace and ease, and recognition that it's all part of this greater cycle of transformation. And here we develop the strength to endure. And by the end, there's this level of reassurance that's tapped into that feels really beautiful and delightful. Even though we haven't made it through the dark tunnel yet, we are just kind of filled with this sense of hope that's really delicious. And then we have the red phase. In the red phase, we kind of have one last push before we begin to tangibly feel and recognize a new spirit, a new quality of ourselves that we haven't experienced before. And it feels like an essential aspect of who we are has kind of like arrived on the scene. And by the end of this process, we've reached that final completion of whatever themes or lessons we were working with, and have officially like integrated them into our being. And so when those same fears come back up, we're able to draw from the memory of being fearless. And that memory is what the Philosopher's Stone really is all about. We're able to tap into the Philosopher's Stone and draw power from it whenever we go through our next initiation. Now there are, okay. That's okay. We're going to go on to the next slide. A couple of the most important alchemical correspondences follow the as within, so without axiom, linking the 7 chakras within to the 7 classical planets without. My teacher, Rachel Capurso of Alien Heart Astrology, who I highly recommend you all check out, she says something really beautiful. She says, if our bodies are temples, then each chakra is like an altar to each planet. So from that concept, each step of alchemy serves to align the chakras from bottom to top, or from the root to the crown, an alignment that must take place to gain access to the Philosopher's Stone. Another very important alchemical correspondence to take note of are the 7 metals, which even share the same glyphs as the planets. The metals in inner alchemy are more symbolic than anything, but they have a really beautiful way of illustrating our progress as we ascend through the process, leading us from those base metals like lead and tin into the more complex metals like quicksilver, and then eventually to the noble metals of silver and gold. The steps, or operations as they're referred to, are also known as the gateways of the corresponding metal. Now, something that is really important when undergoing an alchemical journey is to become aware of the symbols that correlate to each operation or gateway, so that you can be in dialogue with the spirit of transformation as you're moving through it. You'll find that the universe delivers these symbols to you in your daily life through synchronicity. And this is how we can stay conscious of where we are in the process, which is the most important part of a conscious journey of inner alchemy. One reason we would want to intentionally work with stages of alchemy and to become aware of its symbols is to have the privilege of leading a symbolic life, where the connection and meaning to the connection and meaning to the greater meaning of the world begins to kind of pour into your daily experience. And interpreting your daily experience as if it were a powerful initiatory dream is kind of what this is all about. Symbols have the power of bridging the seen and the unseen, the conscious and the unconscious within. But another reason to step into the alchemical crucible intentionally is to learn how to die before we die, which is an old Sufi saying, which essentially means being able to tap into our divinity before our physical bodies die, before our limited lifetimes end. And this is how we're able to make really massive strides in the evolution of who we are, so that we can live out our truth and our highest potential within our limited physical experience again and again and again. And ultimately, by doing the great work as individuals, we are influencing and shaping the world around us to reflect our own evolution. Eventually, we may come to find ourselves living in a much more loving and beautiful and united world if we're willing to do that work on ourselves. So I'll be touching on the main correspondences of each step, including the chakra, planet, and metal more in depth. And I'll also be sharing the traditional alchemical symbols and imagery of each step so that you'll be able to look out for them in your daily life as you move through these operations. But first, I wanted to just touch on the significance of a few of the core symbols of alchemy that represent its entirety, the union of opposites. A really powerful alchemical symbol is the Ouroboros, or the snake eating its own tail. This image contains within itself all the potential for creation and destruction. It is a continuous dance between construction and deconstruction, and alludes to the opposing principles of creation becoming one. This theme of integration is also featured in the yin-yang symbol, the Chinese Tao, yet another classic symbol of alchemy. So each of these symbols illustrates the opposites coming together into a unified whole, which is what Jung referred to as making the unconscious conscious, or realizing the self with a capital S. So because this is the art of integration, it implies that there first exists some sort of division or split that needs reconciling or healing. We can see this dance of splitting apart and then uniting everywhere we look, suggesting that alchemy itself is happening everywhere all the time, from the tiniest cells in our bodies to the celestial paths of the sun and the moon, which create a new moon when they unite, and a full moon when they split themselves across the zodiac. So every living thing moves through a process of transformation that involves this split and union, that involves death, rebirth, and through this continuous phenomenon, which is called solve a coagula in alchemical terms. The Latin phrase solve coagula translates to separate and recombine, dissolve and solidify, or break down and come together. By its very nature, alchemy separates the bits and pieces of the subject at hand, recycles what's false, and then recombines what remains to create something new, a more true expression of the original substance. You might think about it in more antiquated terms by pondering how, if lead can turn into gold, which it can, it was proven it can, this means that gold already exists within the lead. It just needs the right conditions to undergo the necessary transformation to get there. Now, alchemy is also known as a process of fixing the volatile, or drawing spirit into matter. This is represented by the image of squaring the circle. And this is, the squaring the circle is a symbol of the great work itself, and also the Philosopher's Stone. The whole idea of squaring the circle stems from the historic mathematical and geometric problem of fitting a circle that had a specific surface area into a square that had the same surface area. This is an ancient problem that many prominent historical figures like Hippocrates worked on. This is like dating back to 400 before Common Era. But it was never just a mathematical problem. It represented a spiritual challenge for the evolution of humanity. These philosophers felt that to solve it would have the symbolic effect of reconciling the material with the divine, or the finite with the infinite, alchemizing the imperfect human state into a perfected one. The symbol is broken down by the circle, the square, and the triangle. The circle universally means spirit, connecting to infinity. The square universally means matter, connecting it to the finite. And the triangle in the symbol represents ascension, and also the trinity of mind, soul, or of spirit, soul, and body. And this suggests that by drawing spirit into matter, or fixing the volatile through reconciliation, one may transcend consciousness. And this is precisely the goal of the alchemist, to transcend consciousness. So how magical is it that the most basic shapes that we all grew up with, probably the first shapes that we ever learned about, can be recombined to mean something so powerful, and something that like the human spirit strives for throughout its lifetime? It's pretty epic. Now, before we dive into the 7 gateways or operations, let's take a moment to just kind of drop into our bodies, out of the minds for a little bit. Let's maybe take a couple of deep breaths. And land here. And I want you to just kind of briefly for a moment ask yourself if there is a major theme that you're moving through in your life right now. Is it something that's particularly challenging, or validating, or illuminating, or confusing? And if you could describe it as either something's breaking down or coming together, what would it be? And if you could kind of concentrate all the things that just came through into one sentence, I'll ask you to do that because we're going to work with it later. An example would be the part of myself that identifies as a quiet person is having to break down because I have something important to say. And if anybody wants to share what comes up, please do. I could use a rest on my voice.
Well, a major thing I'm working on right now is identifying how I respond to situations and people, like my children versus my husband. And so I've had to really break down the introspective on I'm really not being reactive.
Okay.
Instead of being solidly responding.
Sure.
In the same way in the situations.
So unconsciously reacting to situations.
Yeah.
Got it. Yep. That's something we all go through now, for sure. Okay. Yeah, keep those like words in your mind because we're going to go through all these operations and you're going to be able to pinpoint where you are in this process. Does anybody else want to share?
I'll share. So the part of myself that is independent and autonomous is stepping forward, which is usurping the more historically prominent part of myself that identifies as part of the house, like a couple.
Ooh.
Making that part needs to kind of break down and step into the background because I find that currently they can't coexist.
Okay, so it's coming together, right? I mean, you're breaking down the part of you that believes that you are half.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that is a perfect prelude to coming together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, beautiful.
It was a balance too, right? Because
Yeah.
it's been imbalanced. The other
Sure. Okay, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Love that.
I think mine is overcoming that advocating, being able to like talk and not feel embarrassed.
Okay.
Like especially like with the career that I'm doing right now more than ever. That I'm like remembering that to follow my own moral compass and not let my brain do that homogeneous thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which can be inside kind of like moved like my pendulum to my throat chakra right now.
Beautiful. Okay, that's super clear. You're gonna definitely know where you're at. Beautiful. Anybody else want to share?
I'm hoping I'm reaching the middle part
You're hoping you're reaching the middle?
because this last, I can't even count how many years, 6 or 7 or more, it's just been gradually breaking down and I've been studying esoteric for probably 10 years, they know my life, but it's like I am undergoing a complete alchemical process, and I know we've talked about it a little bit. It's really fortunate that your alchemical set came out right about the time I was actually suicidal for a little while last year. It had reached that point, and I'm about the middle way through the process, and I reached a point to where everything I thought I'd studied and knew and could repeat to everybody, I didn't know a damn thing anymore. You know, I couldn't even depend on my own thoughts as being relevant, and it's a complete breaking down and rebuilding and finding out what's really essential.
Yeah.
So I feel I'm totally epitomizing the higher process right now. I'd like to think that it's a reflection of the same process that culture experiencing,
Me too.
right?
Yes.
There's something's going to have to shift here.
Right. Okay. Beautiful. Anybody else? Okay, cool. Thanks for giving me a break. And we're gonna move on. So first off, we have the alchemical operation of calcination. This is also known as the gateway of lead, which is the point where all transformational journeys begin. So let's talk about lead a little bit. Lead is the oldest known metal on Earth. It is the heaviest of all the metals. It's poisonous. It's also the most durable. It's essentially indestructible. The lead pipes in the Roman Empire are still intact. It's actually kind of funny to think about that. I feel like it was the lead pipes that were like slowly poisoning the Roman Empire to its demise. They were just in a perpetual state of calcination, it seems like. But it does have one weakness, which is fire. Fire is the only element that can alter lead and break it down. This is why fire is the first element associated with this process. So fire represents a melting down of the blockages and the calcified parts of ourselves. And it helps us, after they've kind of melted down and got a little softer, to reveal what's underneath them, which in alchemy we call the prima materia, and it essentially means the soul. Now, if you know anything about the 7 traditional planets, then it would come as no surprise that Saturn rules this operation. Saturn represents gravity, time, maturity, and it's believed to be among the oldest planets in our solar system, much like lead is the oldest material. Saturn is most concerned with material reality, and like the root chakra has a lot to do with our sense of limitation, living in a finite material world, and the fears that arise from that limitation. The root chakra, located at the base of the spine, likewise has a lot to do with our sense of security and survival. And from these insecurities bloom emotions like fear and shame and guilt. And the root chakra is responsible for keeping us anchored to what makes us feel safe, often what makes us feel comfortable, for good or for ill. It's kind of like our survival instinct is centered there at the base of the spine. And that makes sense because it's the foundation from which everything grows from, right? Everything builds up from. A healthy root chakra is able to feel safe and secure despite change and adversity. It understands that limitations and being challenged are a necessary aspect of acquiring wisdom. And it knows that fear is a primal instinct that exists to overcome it. So that is kind of the transformation that happens in the root chakra when we go through the calcination phase. Here, the substance is reduced to ashes with an intense flame. And psychologically, calcination represents the burning off of what's weighing heavy on the psyche to reveal one's soul, which is the prima materia. The soul must be exposed before any meaningful transformation can occur. But it's often a painful experience for the soul to become exposed, as it makes one feel really vulnerable. It's often that we tack on all of these fears and blockages and shame and all the rest to actually hide our soul from the world because we're afraid of it, getting hurt. We're afraid to be our fullest embodied self. So when they find themselves moving through the calcination phase, when there's something weighing really heavy on them, when they're trapped by their own fear, when the world feels unsafe and they feel victimized by it, this material which surrounds our fear is like the pine cone, in that it must be set aflame for the seeds of potential within it to become released and to be able to grow into the great tree that it was created to be, to follow its potential. So when one enters calcination, they may find themselves surrounded by symbols relating to it, like pine cones or pine trees, like the color black being in the nigredo phase, like fire and ash, bones, ravens, devilish figures, and death may be more in our purview, whether it's in real life or in, books we're reading or films we're watching. You'll see these themes become more prominent. And there's also traditional alchemical imagery and symbols that are kind of interesting, and they often feel kind of antiquated, but I'm going to go through them anyway because I've often found them in media that I'm consuming, like films and books and things like that. And the symbols, the traditional chemical symbols for calcination include funeral pyres, scenes of hell, torture, crucifixion, birds rising from flames, confrontations with demonic figures. These are all classic. What the power of alchemy does is it allows us to know when we're in the depths of calcination, for example, that the hardest experiences in life are deeply related to the most glorious, golden experiences in life. And in fact, they are a prelude to those experiences. And that there's like a progression taking place whenever we're here. And being aware of these symbols in our outer world shows us that we are in the process within our inner world, and participating in practices and exercises and rituals that correlate to each step help us come that much closer to moving up the ladder towards our embodied selves. Through the second operation, known as dissolution, or the gateway of tin, we take the metaphorical ashes from calcination and we dissolve them in water. Dissolution brings to the surface any hidden or suppressed material remaining after calcination. And its healing waters help us to acknowledge this material, to give love to it, eventually so that we can let it go. We have to love something pretty entirely before we're able to actually let it go. This step corresponds to the metal tin, which is a very soft and malleable metal, which means that it's not limited in the shapes that it can take. And this fluidity and structure is exactly what begins to unfold on an internal level after the often humbling experience of calcination. It's also highly abundant, and being so versatile and nearly unlimited in its form is what makes it a metal of Jupiter. Jupiter is the planet of expansion, but this is also why it's so beautifully tied to the dissolution phase, because one must learn how to dissolve in order to expand. The beauty about water is that it has the incredible ability to dissolve whatever material is placed in it, and for that same material to grow in its mass and its reach through that dissolution, taking on the shape of whatever body of water it's in. You might think of Jupiter ruling the stage in the same way that Jupiter classically rules the sign of Pisces. Like Pisces, dissolution dissolves the barriers and boundaries and veils between self and other, between dreams and reality, between the inner world and the outer world, which naturally has the effect of creating an emphasis on empathy and creativity and transparency around what may have previously been hidden from view. This is where the sacral chakra comes in. The sacral chakra, located at the womb space, where the creative and the procreative waters flow, is deeply tied to sexuality, making it a center of both pleasure and trauma. This is where we store our deepest emotions. Where calcination melts down the blockages of fear and shame that are tied to the ego and keep us from growing, dissolution exposes to us what was underneath those blockages, essentially helping us to uncover the root cause of our imbalances and our complexes that have perhaps been hidden in the unconscious. This is the material that needs to be gently dissolved with a great deal of love and care. And a great way to accomplish this is through intentionally engaging with the creative function of the sacral chakra. You can think of it as like the art therapy stage, leading us to free ourselves of whatever traumatic burden we've been carrying around through expressing it outwards sensationally or creatively, rather than holding it inside, which really often makes us sick.
Could it also be related to grief?
Absolutely, yes. One may find themselves moving through the dissolution phase when the emotional body is out of balance or one is feeling easily overcome. The dream world becoming more vivid and meaningful. A general slowness that kind of comes over you, asking you to nurture yourself more and take time to feel everything really fully. This process is like the ripple dissolving and expanding into a vast sea. Another perfect visualization is our own salty tears falling from our eyes, eventually returning to where all water ends up, right? Back to the sea. I love this image because crying is like the body's ultimate release. It's just so natural, and holding back tears is like trying to have like a failing dam hold back tons and tons of water that just longs to be on the other side. Again, that kind of stagnation is what can create soul sickness, and it can be really hard to get out of this stage because it's like a vicious circle sometimes. That's another thing I wanted to say briefly that I didn't cover, is that we can become stuck in certain stages, making the alchemical transformation much longer than it could ordinarily be if we move through it more consciously. Traditional alchemical imagery of dissolution includes rain, menstruation, floods, cauldrons, intoxication, white birds, whales, sea monsters, which often represent the unconscious, buried emotions, and streams returning to the sea, unable to distinguish its water from the water of the ocean. Additional symbols might include seashells, seals, coconut milk, seaweed, sage, and more. Through the third operation, known as separation, or the gateway of iron, we take what is left behind by the waters of dissolution, and we sift and sort the prima materia, or the soul, the original substance, from all of the elements that we hid it behind. Oftentimes, those things that we hid it behind have been there for a really long time, and we might have a hard time distinguishing what our truth is from what our identity is, what our truth is from what our subconscious are, and even what truth is from what our beliefs are. It takes a strong willpower to see the identity markers that we've grown attached to and to do away with them, which is partly why separation corresponds to the solar plexus chakra. It requires a powerful desire on the part of the individual to know thyself, despite all of the obstacles, which are more than often self-imposed. And when you come to this realization that so many of the obstacles we face are self-imposed, it can kind of feel like you're at war with yourself, or like your unconscious is at war with yourself. And this is kind of where the inner critic might appear. This feeling of being at war with yourself forces you into a state of dualistic thinking, which is what connects separation to the air element. You can think of the mind or the suit of swords connecting to this step. But it also connects to Mars, and by extension, the metal iron. So let's look at iron really quick. Iron is classically known as the metal of war. In fact, the Iron Age was named so because when weapons of war were starting to be manufactured out of iron, they were vastly more strong and enduring and effective. And same goes for everyday tools. The Iron Age is when blacksmiths became much more advanced and widespread, and iron is often associated with blood as well. We obviously know that we have a lot of iron in our blood. One might take blood in this context as bloodshed from war, but you can also think about it in the context of that which animates us and arouses passion and enlivens us. So again, all these attributes of iron apply to the planet Mars as well. Mars being the planet of action, willpower, and conflict, all things that spin the wheel of the solar plexus chakra. One might find themselves in the separation phase when they're facing an identity crisis, when the inner critic is feeling stronger than usual, when you feel an urge or are prompted to sacrifice something. The key to moving through separation is the desire to know the truth at whatever cost to who you've been in the past. Oftentimes this means sacrificing something that's made you feel safe in the past or something that has made you feel included and accepted by others. Sometimes this means sacrificing an addictive behavior or a judgment that you have of yourself or others. You don't want to fight these parts of yourself with an air of superiority or in a violent, hateful manner. Rather, you want to learn how to love these parts of yourself so that you can actually let them be discarded from your life. It's like you can conquer them out of love. If you don't, then you kind of just feed them, feed them the negative qualities that you're trying to get rid of in the first place. Traditional symbols of separation include all cutting tools such as hatchets, knives, scissors, and swords, even surgical tools, but also surgery itself. Divorce is a big symbol of separation, the release of steam, the breaking apart of heaven and earth, and additional symbols might include battle, war, crows, hunting, martyrdom, nettles, and more. After we've set free the false parts of ourselves in separation, we come to the fourth operation known as conjunction. Through conjunction, or the gateway of copper, we take what remains from separation and we recombine the parts of ourselves that are left to eventually create something new. It's important to note that what is eliminated in separation is not necessarily your shadow parts, but simply the parts that are not true to your essential essence. Your shadow parts are actually pretty much saved because they allude to a truer aspect of who you are. They allude to your unconscious behaviors. And it's the merging and recombination of the shadow and the light parts within us that's known as the alchemical marriage, where the opposites unite and become integrated within the self with a capital S. This is a really beautiful place to be. It kind of feels like a celebration because you've had a long haul. It's like been a long journey to get here. And you can finally see that your shadow is like an integral part of your evolution. And then your shadow sees your conscious self as something that's not against it, but is actually trying to maybe expose the gifts that it holds. So it's this really like loving union between your conscious and unconscious selves. Conjunction corresponds to the heart chakra and the planet Venus. The heart is the chakra that connects the upper three chakras with the lower three chakras, or the higher functions with the lower functions. It's kind of like a bridge in our bodies, and that's why it's so powerful. We can Also see this through a more symbolic lens through the functions that are tied to the heart chakra. Obviously, there's love, which is like the ultimate bridge between entities, but there's also empathy, which is crucial to shadow integration. For a successful conjunction to transpire, one cannot hate their shadows. Again, this is like an ongoing theme. They have to understand them and respect them and see what they need so that we can unlock their unique gifts. When we unlock those gifts, the greater image of who we are and what our purpose here is revealed to us. Much like the heart chakra, Venus rules love, beauty, and empathy, but is also a great connector, being the planet that rules relationships. The relationships between our many parts, the relationship between ourselves and others, and ourselves and the greater world around us. She values the contrast between entities, but also really loves to recombine the many parts of both entities to bridge the gap between them, creating an entirely new image, like two people coming together to create a child. I can think of it that way. Like a child that also embodies all of the positive and negative qualities of their mother and their father and anybody else in their lives. Just like, just submerged into one being. This quality is seen in how Venus corresponds to the metal copper also. Copper is a conductive metal, but also a magnifying metal. So when it's combined with other metals, it accentuates the already existing properties of them, making them stronger. And copper also turns green when it oxidizes, which is the color of Venus and the heart chakra. One might find themselves in the conjunction phase when they are recognizing their own shadowy parts and embracing them wholeheartedly. When there is a greater awareness of one's relationship with the outer world, when a healing process is reaching a peak or a pivotal point where something new is emerging. Traditional symbols of conjunction include the flaming heart, doves, the fruitful earth, weddings, that's a really big one, hermaphrodites, angels coming down from heaven, and more. Other symbols of conjunction include the Ankh, intercourse, priests, roses, symbiotic relationships in nature, willow, apples, bowls, romance, bridges, and more. There's so many symbols for conjunction. After we've merged the shadow and light aspects of ourselves in conjunction, we come to the fifth operation known as fermentation. Through fermentation, or the gateway of quicksilver, the new substance that's born in conjunction goes through its own death process so that the spirit within it can be resurrected. You can think of it as grapes having to break down their physical form and decay, often in a light, tight barrel, which I'll also come back to, in order to ferment and release the alcohol or the spirit that is required to turn these grapes into fine wine. Grapes are a miracle all on their own, but wine is the more full, embodied expression of the grape's potential. Even though this beautiful complexity is activated and able to arise out of this process, the initial experience can be really difficult. It's actually called putrefaction at the beginning of fermentation, which doesn't sound like a very pretty word. But it's a very inspiring place to be also whenever we leave that putrefaction. What happens in putrefaction is something called the secret fire is activated. So the light, tight barrel that the grapes are in to create fine wine, there's a heat that is created from the breakdown, and the darkness is also required to release the spirits from the grapes. And this is kind of what happens to us symbolically. It kind of feels like we're just like our outer selves are kind of just decaying. And but we also know that it's for a greater purpose. So even though it's challenging, it's still a part of the red phase, which is all about the coming together. And we can still feel that when we're going through it. If the heart is where we access our ability to love, the throat is where we're able to express that love and the unique genius that arises from love. It's a very inspiring place to be again, and in many ways, fermentation marks a moment when we realize that you can direct your love and that genius to something much, much greater than you were able to before. Much greater than yourself, essentially. And this is what it means to have a healthy throat chakra. Mercury is the god of communication, directly tying it to the throat chakra, but he's also the psychopomp, suggesting that Mercury is the spirit's guide through the process of death and rebirth, being able to move fluidly between the land of the living and the land of the dead. And much like the god Mercury, liquid Mercury, or quicksilver, is both poisonous and medicinal. It has that duality. And the only metal that can change from solid to liquid and back again, making it really fluid. Something really special about this step is that after the initial putrefaction takes place, something really beautiful begins to emerge from the decay. You might have seen like time-lapse videos of an animal going through the decomposition process. And there's that like moment when all these colors start to emerge. That's what we're talking about here. The alchemists were seeing from their experiments this film develop in the fermentation phase. That's almost kind of like an oily film that's like rainbow. So they called this phenomenon the peacock's tail. And it's symbolizing that beautiful gift that unfolds from the rot. One might find themselves in the fermentation phase when they're moving through an ego death, shedding the layers of the old self, when your ability to express your truth is tested, when a newfound inspiration arises out of the challenging situation that we're facing, especially if it's a situation that challenges the ego. Traditional symbols of fermentation include ladders, thunderstorms. This one's funny. This is a classic alchemical symbol. Sexual activity inside of a blackened vessel. Oh, yeah. Right. UFOs. And I've actually found UFOs to be like a major symbol for this step. Yeah. Just things that I was reading about at the time that I was in fermentation, and then like films that were just like around me at the time. There were just so many aliens, it was crazy. So you'll notice things like that whenever you go through this process. Another one is obviously wine and wine barrels and grapes. One that I really appreciate is the bee, because the bee is able to travel between kind of like the womb of the hive and back out again, but it's kind of this like beautiful exchange, being pollinators, you know, and like the creation of honey also, just like so perfect for this step. And also scarab beetles, peacock feathers, panthers, shamans, and magicians, both of which are able to kind of move between worlds. I'm just gonna have a sip of water. After the spirit has resurrected in fermentation, we come to the sixth operation, known as distillation. Through distillation, or the gateway of silver, the spirit that's resurrected through fermentation goes through a purification and clarification process, making it more and more refined. It's like putting the spirit through a sieve or a strainer over and over and over again. You can also think of it as taking the wine from fermentation and making brandy out of it. Which is even more refined expression of the grape. Brandy is lighter than wine in both its essence and its color, and it's more spiritually potent, obviously. This kind of purification and refinement is what takes place within ourselves during the distillation phase of inner alchemy. Ruled by the moon and the third eye chakra, we come into a state of deep reflection where we're able to see things more clearly than we were able to before. Nothing is obstructing our view of the truth. We can see through lies and deception really easily. We aren't burdened by fears in the same way that we once were when we were going through those lower functioning chakras at the beginning of this process that are tied to like our survival instincts. Rather, we're able to see any fears that come up with greater clarity as to what's behind them, so we can it's almost like we can alchemize them while we're in this phase pretty quickly and swiftly. My teacher, Rachel Capurso, describes distillation as a circular process of rising and falling, like how water can be boiled into steam and then condensed back down into liquid, combining within itself the powers of both the above and the below. Being tied to the moon, this can also be a time when we're moved by emotion. It's like those defining moments in your life when something's ending and something else is beginning, and there's just this natural kind of emotive response that takes place. But being at this stage of the process with all of the clarity that it brings is different than the confusing emotions we might feel in dissolution. Because the emotions that come up here are more transparent. Again, we can kind of see what their purpose is, and we can see the bigger picture unfolding beyond them. This step correlates to the metal silver, one of the precious and valuable metals. Silver is representative of wisdom. You can think of silver hair coming through as a symbol of wisdom and experience. And it's extremely reflective, like the moon reflecting the light of the sun, reflecting the light of the source. It is the counterpart of gold, much like the moon is the counterpart of the sun, thinking, feminine and masculine, unconscious and unconscious. So in this gateway, we kind of are towards the top of the ladder. And it's almost like we come to a more basic understanding of the foundations of duality, and we know that we're kind of in one phase of that fuller understanding, and we're soon going to be just kind of completed within it. If that makes sense. One might find themselves in the distillation phase when they are in a profound state of self-reflection, when their perspective is widened and they're no longer operating from the ego alone, when they are experiencing visions, prophetic dreams, or when the intuition is generally heightened and more on point. Traditional symbols of distillation include the lotus flower, eightfold patterns, snow and rainbows, owls, a serpent on the cross, winged serpents, and the green lion eating the sun. Additional symbols include the unicorn, which I really love. It's like, you can see it really clearly with the unicorn because they have this horn that's on their third eye, and it's piercing the veil of consciousness. It's the perfect symbol. And also aloe and sapphires, moonstones, halos, and mandalas are all symbols of this step. After the spirit has been refined and purified in distillation, we come into the seventh and last alchemical operation known as coagulation. Through coagulation, or the gateway of gold, the spirit gets drawn into matter where it is crystallized into form. So we kind of come full circle, but this amazing transformation has taken place. Here we've reached the sacred center of ourselves, where our highest potential expression resides, like the center point of the mandala from which all things unfold. And this is like the axis mundi, where the soul meets the body, through a clear and unobstructed spirit. In alchemy, the spirit is kind of like the bridge between the soul and the body that can kind of give you a better idea as to why we would want to refine the spirit to the point that we do. In coagulation, there is a sense of wholeness that is rarely felt. And the phrase fixing the volatile is extremely apparent now, because there's this feeling of the truth of who we are being solidified within ourselves. And this solidity is what is referred to in alchemy again as the Philosopher's Stone. It's like the most complete state of being. Kind of feels like love has completed itself within us. And I also just wanted to note that the first time I went through the alchemical process, I felt like a visceral solidity happening in my heart. So this can also be a very embodied experience. There was like just something that like solidified inside of me that allowed me to feel so much more confident and fearless. And like I just had this inner knowing that I could essentially just move through any obstacle that came my way and still be who I am. This step is obviously related to gold and by extension the sun and the crown chakra. Both the sun and the metal gold have been revered and worshipped more than any other deity or material throughout human history. They reflect their power through one another on a psychic and physical level, with the sun symbolizing immortality and regeneration, and gold representing indestructible power and purity. The climax of the alchemical journey, like any, is very fleeting. However, it has the effect of opening the channel of consciousness that is aligned with divine consciousness, awakening one to their innate divinity. And this is where the crown chakra comes in. The revelation that our divinity makes a profound imprint within us is what happens. That imprint is not easily removed. And again, that memory of viscerally feeling and experiencing our divinity is what keeps us going when the darkness inevitably creeps in again, when we start the cycle over again. This memory is held within the Philosopher's Stone, which is really the discovery and embodiment of one's true self and one's true will, where all the opposites are reconciled within. The more that we reach coagulation, the stronger and more accessible the Philosopher's Stone becomes, helping us to attune to our divinity at any moment that we need to. One might find themselves in the coagulation phase when they reach a state of profound balance and peace in their inner knowing, when tests of character don't faze them, when they know what they want, why they want it, and how they're going to get it. Traditional symbols of coagulation include the soaring eagle, the balanced scales of justice, the squaring of the circle symbol, and the phoenix. The phoenix is probably one of the most popular alchemical symbols that exists, and it might be like the most powerful one too. It like represents the process in its entirety, and it's just so clear. Additional symbols include the lion, the Buddha, Christ, diamonds, sunflower, and the world. Okay, before we kind of finish this up, I want you to reflect on what you thought about earlier when I asked you to do some self-inquiry. Having learned all of the different correspondences, the planets and the chakras, and all the alchemical symbols associated with each operation, where do you think that you are in the alchemical process right now, based off of what you came to? And if anybody wants to share, please do.
Could you restart the process if you feel like could you go back and start it?
If you want to, yeah, you totally can. If you feel like maybe things weren't integrated from the following steps, then sure. But if you feel like you're already at a certain step, I would think that alludes to having completed the other ones. Yeah.
But wouldn't it be true that there could be higher cycles of that same?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I've noticed that you can be alchemizing something in your life, and it's just kind of like a little fractal of this greater alchemy happening, if that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, it seems like that. So many themes reiterate themselves, especially in the esoteric exploration of life. Yeah, I mean, you may not hit bottom again, like the first time, but you may still have experiences that take you through. I'm asking.
Absolutely. I mean, from experience, I feel like, I mean, again, it's not a one and done thing. So once you reach the end, you're going to start again. But I found that when I am immersed in a step and something like from a previous step comes up, I'm able to move through it so much faster. You know, it's like the process is just kind of sped up once we've gone through it.
You're really reminiscent of following exams that mountain that shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
And you maybe 3 or 4 times above some little place that you were at before, but you can look back on it and
exactly, that's it. I know the spiral is a perfect symbol for that.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wish I'd included that. It's perfect. Does anybody else want to share? Or if you have any questions, please go for it.
Well, I think it's interesting. I'm trying to take like what I thought of for myself and identify the phase that I might be in for that. And I feel like I'm looking at them and trying to kind of discern that. And there's 3 different phases that I think, it's like
Yeah.
very difficult.
So what phases do you think connect?
Separation, conjunction, or fermentation. I feel like there are different like things that weigh in for all 3 potentially.
Have any of the symbols from any one of these things come in that you can remember?
I wish I'd written the symbols down.
Oh, oh.
I feel like that's the one thing I did not think of.
Let's just go back. Let's go to separation. Just looking at this image, what does it evoke in you? There's like a light part of you and a dark part of you kind of on equal footing, but it kind of feels like there's an explosion happening between them. The daggers allude to the mind. Like, is this a big mind game that you're playing with yourself?
I don't think so.
Okay. It's also very much about your identity. Like, how do you identify? And what's true about how you identify, and what is just kind of maybe old or false or not in alignment with like who you really feel you are.
Yeah, so that's interesting because while the portion where it seems like it's kind of a explosion or like a back and forth between the 2 sides does not feel like it fits for me, the part about identity does somewhat.
Okay, so I wonder if you're actually in fermentation then.
So that's super interesting too, because when I was looking through it and I was trying to discern that, the first thing I thought was like, well, separation maybe, conjunction definitely not, maybe fermentation. Why is it on one end or the other and not conjunction? And then I kind of rethought and I thought maybe conjunction as well. But I think that's really interesting that you also kind of like made that jump. Why did you make that jump?
Well, because in fermentation, it's kind of like the ego is Like, it sounds like you've already kind of come to like a awareness of the shadow, right? And I mean, just based off of how you described it, it doesn't sound like you like hate that shadow, you know? It sounds like you like actually really understand it, and you've probably given it love and recognized it as something that's made you feel safe in the past. And in fermentation, we have we've come to a place where we have already kind of merged that shadow part with the part that loves it. And now we're just doing one more breakdown to really allow what's underneath it to rise.
Yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah, that resonates for sure. And also, like, when I was considering where I'm at this point, the portion talking about the putrefaction also really, I felt like that resonated too. Kind of like there's a little bit of that for sure. I'm not sure I'm past it or if it's still going. Yeah, I don't know about something.
Yeah. If something like really spoke to you when I was talking about it, then it might also be alluding to where you.
Thank you.
Totally.
Question on.
Okay. Well, in traditional alchemy, like material transmutation, the material would go through a black phase. It would literally look black. And then when you go through the steps afterwards, separation and conjunction, it would start to look white, and then it would start to look red. So that's why they're separated into these steps. But just generally, calcination and dissolution is a really challenging place to be. Like you said, it's related to grief. It's related to our greatest fears. We're kind of like, we feel so blocked from like what our truth is and what our purpose is, that it's just a hard place to be. In separation and conjunction, we start to have more clarity about what that darkness is all about. And that clarity gives us hope. And it gives us a sense that we're going to move beyond it. And you know, the alchemical marriage takes place in the white phase. It's not the red phase, because we're not quite there yet. But the alchemical marriage conjunction is such a loving place to be. It is like a white light. It kind of encompasses all the other colors, if you will. Does that? I hope that answers your question, but let me know if you have something more specific.
A little bit confused, I guess, because it's like, are you just assuming you're always in some kind of alchemical process, or and you're living on these stages?
Yes, we are. We're ever evolving, right? We might be stuck in one phase and feel stagnant, though, and that's completely human and normal. But when we move through this process consciously and intentionally, when we do exercises and rituals to help us to move through each process, it becomes swift, and we'll see like a full circle happen quicker, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm curious about the, like, how do you know you're in a block? I mean, is it possible to have some different things at different stages? And kind of be a little.
Yeah, I mean, generally we're working on kind of like one or two like major themes in our life at a time, right? I mean, we might be experiencing challenges in like all the different parts of our lives, but what is like the underlying symbolic theme happening, right? I mean, yeah, I'm not you, so I don't like.
So there's like a degree of frustration that you can feel, you know, even if you don't recognize that it's related to whatever you're working on.
Oh yeah.
And also
just lack of clarity.
Yeah, it can be very, very confusing to be stuck in one of these phases, especially the early ones, because they're so challenging. But again, that's like when we become conscious of like all these symbols and like what to look out for, and even like certain words like ego death, you know, or marriage, you know, we can start to see our lived experience through that lens and begin to be able to pinpoint where we are in all of it.
Do you have any suggestions for moving from dissolution to separation?
Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to include rituals into this presentation. I really did, but I knew it was going to be way over our time. So,
Yes.
there are rituals and things in the alchemical self deck if you want to work more intentionally with it. But for dissolution, I would actually start doing some stream of consciousness writing, because then you're like really tapped into your unconscious. You're just flowing. You're like able to kind of tap into the more emotional parts of who we are and let it all just like out on the page with no judgment.
Yeah.
And it often comes out really beautifully too. And another thing is just to like really tap into your creative function, you know,
Yeah.
to try to like crystallize whatever emotions that are in you outside of you through art. You know, art is such a beautiful way to fix the volatile, right? Because we all have a creative spirit, and when we're able to put form to it in any way, we are doing that process, and it can be really helpful with through dissolution, especially if we're moving through something really emotional.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say I'm just finishing the separation phase.
It sounded like
on
it.
this alchemical set. And I think even before I contacted her because I was having so much trouble, she was actually hadn't even advertised the set yet. Like, it was so timely, extremely. But I began just accepting all this shit. I would never even think you would have to endure. And laying in my bed, just breathing my cow breath, I was in Tai Chi. Pretty much all I had left of me. And just accepting, wow, is this just what life is going to be now? So I give up on all hopes and dreams and aspirations. And the mudras and mantras are helpful, which I guess is what you didn't get to talk about.
Yeah.
She includes in the word. I pretty much do 10
Mm.
of the mudras and mantras that I'm focusing on one or the other of the cards each day. And I'm coupling mine with the planets that go through. So I'm invoking the planets
Beautiful.
as I go through. So I just finished a planetary phase in Hermetic work. And so I thought, well, what the hell? It's the perfect timing. It was back in the Sagittarius age, which that I decided to start. And she goes, well, invoke Saturn for 90 days. Well, it turned out to be really fitting to do it for 60
Okay.
with just the calcination. So I just see with the calcination of 60 days.
Woo.
And then each other phase gone to 30. But Mars actually started talking to me the night before the full moon.
Oh, yes. See,
Somehow
that stuff will happen.
So, anyway, I don't know if that's helpful at all, but it's a little testimony of my experience thus far. Start Venus
philosopher's stone and the brain that develops from going through these processes and purifying themselves throughout their lifetime. I guess that's sort of like evidence that is acquired from their course of their purification. And I guess like how effective their practice is. Do you know what I'm talking about when they sit through the bodies of the Dalai Lama or different monks after they've been purified?
I have not heard anything.
Okay, yeah, there is actually physical stone.
Wow.
So,
Man, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's so cool. Yeah. I didn't know anything about that. I mean, I've always assumed that it was just kind of this like metaphorical thing, but yes, I mean, I did feel a visceral solidification. It was almost like there was like a new little magnet or like a weighted magnet or something in my chest. That doesn't happen every time I reach coagulation like this. This was just like a really powerful. But like the memory of feeling that actually helped me move through several other, processes since then. Yeah.
I wonder if that maybe will have girls. I think they actually survived the fire.
Oh my God, that's beautiful. I love that so much. Yeah. I somehow lost my slideshow, you guys. I'm sorry. Anybody else have any questions for me?
I'm just thinking about the magnet stone in your heart. You're not connecting. You don't even
Okay, I'm gonna move on then.
you're not supposed to.
Oh, you're not seeing it there now? Okay. I'm not sure. Sorry, I don't know what I did. Goodness. Do you have any thoughts, Steve?
What program are you using?
It's Google Meet, and the presentation is on Impress. It's like
Oh, as far as getting it up there,
yeah.
I don't know what you did before.
Well, I don't know what, like somehow they got split. I did this.
Do you need this up there, or want to fit that over there? Just, I don't know, where's full screen?
Slideshow. The slideshow tab up there. Like
Which-
the words by slide.
So slideshow.
Yeah. You can just go to the first one.
There you go.
That's
And then if you do the share,
on this screen. What's the
I don't know if it's here. You go to the other one with the salt.
be an option. I'll just share screen.
Mhm.
Just well, it's like I have to exit out of this, right?
There you go. Then go down to here. Oh, here.
There's something. Stop
Click here.
Yeah, see, that's where it wasn't showing up. Sorry, you guys that are online.
Here. Can we click out of that? Have that window. And come back.
Whoa.
Whoa. So is this a touch screen?
Well, actually, I think it can be used.
It's this. Stop presenting,
Okay, I'll just start over.
and then it'll start over. Yeah.
Ah.
Let's see, that's going to give you the full, that's going to give you that screen. Yeah.
No. I only have like 2 slides, and it's like a conclusion slide, so we're good, you guys. If only I can, okay, there. And no, it's very odd. I don't know, but we don't really need the other side. That's okay. All I'm gonna say concluding is just some suggestions moving through this process yourself. You're gonna want to weave your creative spirit into it. We have talked about this with Tara's question, but it's like the alchemists who were doing these experiments in their labs, having a direct reflective experience within themselves. It works both ways. So if you're choosing to go on an inner alchemy journey, it's really helpful to have something to like represent that journey if you wanted to work with the alchemical symbols intentionally that way. But just generally, any creative process has its own alchemical process. So it can be really, really helpful if you're a creative person and want to anchor your inner alchemy into a physical form. I also really highly recommend building an altar to each gateway that you go through as a symbolic action, signifying that you're moving through it intentionally by weaving all these symbols into your daily life. Weaving them into your daily life intentionally will help the outer world deliver those symbols to you also. If you follow my work, then you probably have heard me speak about how symbols play into magic. They're really important. And they have the power to like program the subconscious and, so intentionally using this like phenomenon of symbols, being able to help you move through this process is only going to benefit you. And one more thing is I wanted to add that if you find that you're wanting to work on a specific thing going through the inner alchemy process, that's awesome. But also you can expect for other areas of your life to also be going through that process because of its reflective nature. It's not just going to alchemize your fear of public speaking. It's going to alchemize like your fear of speaking your truth to your friends and lovers or whoever it is. And then so many other things, it's not just going to be about speaking. It's going to be, all different kinds of things. So just going through it, going into it with one idea is a great gateway into transforming other areas of your life that are also needing to be alchemized. Yeah, I think that's all. Thank you guys so much for being here. I like it. Really lovely.